She left the fire behind, but the smoke stayed in her eyes. And in that smoke, something harder than grief was born. A promise that would not be broken. 1872. The Wyoming plains lay like a bruise under a cold moon, all wind and empty horizon. Out here, the law was a rumor, and settlements were nothing more than stubborn specks on a map. Mary Callahan knew this better than most. She knew the weather, the slow patience the land demanded, the way a calf's first breath felt like a small miracle. She knew how to mend a fence with one hand and rock her boy to sleep with the other. What she did not know was mercy. When the men came in the thin hours of night, their shadows were long and hungry. They took her husband's life with a torch and an easy laugh. They set the house to paper and flame, and they stole like cowards steal everything unsupervised, the one thing Mary could not replace. Her son's horse, Valor. The last tether to the life she'd built. By dawn, her home was ash, her arms empty, and her heart a map of burn marks. Most women would have fallen into the soft dark of despair. Mary stood in the ash and felt something else. Her knees were scorched, but the part of her that mattered tightened like a coil. She looked at the smoking ruin of the corral, at the charred pickets, at where Valor had once stood, and the grief folded into a new shape. Resolve. She did not weep long. There was no audience to pity her, and pity was the currency of cowards. Instead, she took what she could salvage: a blanket, a rusted gun with a single round left, and a small satchel of pemmican, and mounted the cheapest, meanest filly she could find at the edge of town. The filly was thin, stubborn, and perfect. Mary named her Mercy, though mercy had nothing to do with what she planned. The days that followed carved her thin. She rode from one dry wash to another, from a saloon where rumors flowed cheaper than whiskey, to a two-room cabin where men slept with knives under blankets. She learned to read men the way most learned to read weather. By shadow, by gait, by the way their hands flexed near belt buckles. She slept under saddles, drank from tin cups, and let the horizon be both map and mouth. Every night she whispered the same name, not for comfort, but as a compass. "Valor," she said into the star-mottled dark. "Find him." The name was a prayer and a threat and a promise all at once. Men heard that whisper and assumed it belonged to a grieving mother softened by tragedy. They were wrong. It's easy to romanticize vengeance in the storybooks, to paint it with broad, heroic strokes. But the truth is grainier. Vengeance is patient. It's a slow, small thing that tightens noose-like around weak men. It asks learning which trail leads to the Dewdrop Saloon and which to the river bend, where an outlaw sleeps like a dog. It's counting the number of men in a camp before dawn. It's carrying a gun with the quiet certainty of someone who has nothing left to lose. Mary became all those things. She kept a notebook of faces, small notches scrawled in ink on the edge of a torn page, each one a promise unfinished. Hours turned into weeks. The wind rearranged the land between her and what had been. The land rearranged her in return. Hunger hollowed her cheeks, but there was a hard light in her eyes that even the dust could not dull. The trail ended at a crooked bend in the Greywater River, where a cluster of men had made their low camp. They were loud, full of bravado, drinking from a bottle and daring the night to care. Valor's saddle lay propped against a log, muddy and abandoned, like a slur against what had been stolen. Mary watched them from the far bank. She noted the drunkenness, the numbers, the soundtrack of their laughter. She also noted a last man, the one who'd kept to the shadows, the one who moved with a careful, practiced silence. That was her target. She could have shot them all from across the river, but that's not how she did it. Mary wasn't a soldier. She was a woman who understood the weight of a name and the geometry of a saddle. She crossed at first light, letting the cold water bite her calves, letting the current steady her hands. She crept like a fox, because that was the advantage she had. Surprise and fury that felt more like calculation than madness. The last man was sleeping near a fire, bottle rolled to his side, mouth slack in a high-rolling grin. He woke to Mary's silhouette, and the grin turned into a startled laugh that died before it left his throat. She did not speak. She raised the gun with the same hand that had once mended fences, The shot was a single final punctuation against the canyon wall. It silenced the river for a second, and then the world moved again. There are acts that change a person irreversibly. Standing over that man, seeing the color leaving his face, Mary did not feel triumph. She felt a strange, empty calm, like the quiet after a storm. With the same practiced motion, she removed Valor's saddle and checked the tack as if it were a mundane task. The horse nickered and shook the dirt from its mane, and something in Mary unknotted. She brushed its coat with hands that had been dirt-streaked and calloused. Her fingers remembered softer days and a little boy's laugh. The horse's warmth pulsed against her palm like a living, breathing map back to what had mattered. Riding back through the long sun, Mary did not become a legend because of the firing shot. She became a legend because she came home. Not a triumphant marauder returning with trophies, but a woman who reclaimed a small piece of what violence had tried to erase. She sat Valor between her knees and let the saddle remember the weight of a child. People watched her pass, the slow saloon-goers, the tired ranch hands, and they whispered in the half-light, for stories, prefer the half-truth. They called her the widow who crossed the Badlands. Some called her worse things, few called her by her name. Mary didn't tell the story in saloons or at church. She brought Valor to the little grave plot behind the rebuilt cabin, laid the saddle on a fence rail, and spoke a few words into the dirt. She fed the horse, wrapped its mane, and carved a small notch on the fence post, a mark that said, "This once belonged." Then, because the world expects women to return to all the tasks they left behind, she mended fences and milked cows and taught the neighbors' children to ride. She went through the motions of living because living was its own quiet defiance. Years later, the story softened into myth. Campfire retellings added swagger or sorrow depending on the teller. Some said she single-handedly brought down the entire gang. Others said she'd been aided by a mysterious ranger. Truth, as always, kept its private face. Mary kept hers too, weathered, guarded, present. She grew older with the land, and people began to put offerings by the fence, a new saddle, a ribbon, sometimes a tin cup of coffee. They'd nod in her direction and say, "There goes Mary Callahan, she rose from ash." Not every wound heals neat. Some scars are road maps. The bullet hole in a cabin post, the singed corner of a blanket, the ridge on Valor's flank. These were small monuments to the ferocity that can sit inside ordinary flesh. And in the decades that followed, when a young woman wanted to be told she could be strong and quiet and unstoppable all at once, someone pointed at Mary and said, "Watch her, she's the one who went looking for what was taken." Mary never pretended she'd done anything noble. She did not tell young men the glamour of revenge. She taught her neighbors how to keep a clean gun and a steady hand. She smiled rarely and with the weight of someone who'd paid more than she was owed in grief. Yet on some nights, when the moon was thin and the wind carried a scent of winter passers-by, would see her at the fence, hand on Valor's flank, whispering one name into the dark. Not a prayer, not a boast, but a soft reminder. What's taken can sometimes be found not by law, but by the people the law was meant to protect. Her name floated on the wind for a long time after. The widow who crossed the Badlands, they called her. And in that name was everything a frontier could never quite hold: sorrow, return, and the quiet, terrible justice of a woman who would not be erased.